My name is Rachel Desgrosseilliers. I'm the Executive Director of Museum LA. I was born and raised in Lewiston, Maine. With regards to my heritage as a Franco-American, I started going to grammar school, and we were taught with the sisters at Holy Family Church. In the morning we learned in French, and in the afternoon we learned in English. And that was all fine until it was time to go to high school. And at that point, my dad didn't speak any English because he came directly from Canada. And at that time, everybody in Lewiston, Auburn spoke French. So no matter where you went, to the hospital, to the grocery store, or downtown for shopping, everybody spoke French. So it was an issue. However, when we got into high school, we were told, you're in America now, so you're going to speak English, and if you don't, you're going to get detention. Well, needless to say, I got detention quite a bit because French was my first language. And so at that point, we kind of felt like we were second-class citizens because our language wasn't good enough for being here. And a lot of people really got kind of stayed with that, marked with it, because I left and went to study elsewhere and was exposed to a lot of things. And it wasn't until I went to do my residency for hospital administration in Cincinnati, Ohio. These three gentlemen, the top executives, took me to this restaurant, La Maisonnette, and I never forgot the name because when I walked in, the maitre d' came and said, bonsoir, and started talking. We're going back and forth, and I turn around and there's these three executives with their mouth open, and I'm going, what's the matter? And they said, you speak French. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And so I went home that night, and they said, you're a genius, you speak two languages. Well, when I went home that night, I thought, wow, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, how many people can speak two languages totally fluently? And now when I come back, that's when I took my pride back as being a French Canadian. When I came back home, however, I saw that a lot of my cohorts of the same age and whatnot, they were still reeling from being marked by that. They're still very hurt by it and so forth, and because they haven't been exposed, to other things, or haven't been given the opportunity to take their pride back, and that really bothers me. I think about it now, and I say, we were experiencing discrimination, but in those days, discrimination was not kind of used, was not popular, I guess. So that's what was happening, but they hadn't kind of just not put a name to it. And I realize today that's what was going on. It bothers me because I see new immigrants coming in today, and they're being told the same thing, and I feel like saying, and I try to tell people, look, yes, I can understand that they need to learn English. However, don't make them to the point, don't lead them to being ashamed of their language. And so their native tongue needs to be kept. Because once it's gone, like for us right now, my children and grandchildren, they never learned it. And everybody my age after me, it's gone because we were ashamed, because we're supposedly, we got detention if we spoke it. So we didn't want our children to go through the same thing. And nobody should be put through something like that. It was a community that really pulled together. The different churches work, and people say, well, the new immigrants come in here and they have all this, they have all this help and welfare and all that. Well, when you think back, in those days, there was no welfare department in the cities, but you had the Lithuanian churches, the Greek churches would help their own, the French Canadians would help their own. You know, so the churches were the soup kitchens and the homeless shelters and things like that, you know. So it was different, but you know, you still did get some help. But the other thing that we found, I found by studying here is there were tons of jobs available in those days. Today, it's a very different world, and even though a lot of the new immigrants would seem to want to work, they can't because they can't find the jobs. So that makes a big difference. And it was a happy place. We weren't, most of us were mill workers and shoe workers and so forth, so we weren't rich people, but that was okay because we all were pretty much about the same, and we were happy. We were just satisfied with what we had, and if somebody needed some help for a major, you know, disaster or whatever, everybody would go and help. And if somebody had something to celebrate, everybody partied with them and whatnot. So it was a fun time growing up. It was a good place to grow up. Well, I left to go into the order, the Sisters of Charity in St. Hyacinth, and I actually was brought back after I did my studies to come and run St. Mary's Hospital in Lewiston, Auburn. That's what brought me back, but when I left there, I decided to stay. I had opportunities to go get big jobs elsewhere, but family was all here, and it was the type of community that I wanted to live in, and I wanted to have a more relaxed life than the big executive job life that I would have led going to the big cities and so forth. It was just the way of life here is very different, and that's basically why I decided to stay. I was asked, I had my own business with my husband in Auburn, and we had just closed it, and I had helped a little bit the founder at the beginning when he first started. I had been on the board for a little while, and so they incorporated in 1994, and then in 2004 they tapped me to help find an executive director to come. They had gotten a little grant to come and help them organize the museum and move it forward. There were two things we were looking for: somebody who actually really knew the community and also had good organizational skills. When we interviewed, they either had one or the other, but none, you know, not the two. And so as we were talking, two of the board members started staring at me. I just closed the business, and they said, "What are we doing?" We're looking at her. And I said, I'm not looking for a job. I don't know anything about museums, you know, and no. So after 2 months of badgering, I finally said, okay, I'll help you for 6 months, 2 days a week. And when I was showing people the equipment upstairs, I just felt something was missing. My dad worked here for 38 years. And what about his story? What about what happened when he was here? I came to see him in '78, just before he retired, and it was July. I walked in here, it was 120 degrees. I could have done this to my clothes, it was so humid. I understood why he was totally deaf, because we were nose to nose and we had to scream at each other over the looms and whatnot. And then we used to laugh at him when we used to go run to the corner to meet him at the bus depot, and just, you know, he had lint in his eyes, ears, nose, even his belly button, and we kept laughing and saying, "Dad, what the heck do you do for work?" and so forth. Well, I wasn't laughing when I left that day. And to me, that was a big piece that was missing. So I decided to do a mill worker reunion. Everybody said, "You're crazy. How are you going to find, you know, where are you going to find the..." So that whole summer, I stood at fairs and festivals and had a table and said, "Are you a mill worker? Sign here. We're going to have a day to honor you." Honor us? Why? We're just mill workers. Why would you honor us? You know, and I says, because you guys built the community. Well, the day that we had the official luncheon to honor them, we had 586 people show up. I had this, we had asked them to bring their artifacts if they had some, and this little gentleman came in with his box, Monsieur Foisy, with his box of loom fixers tools. I still have the cardboard box. And, you know, I looked at him and I said, oh, Monsieur Foisy, merci beaucoup. We don't have any of these, you know, and whatnot. This is wonderful. You're thanking me. You're thanking me. I thank you. And when he came up, he had these big tears. And he said, I can go in peace now because somebody cared about what I did in my life. And to me, that was like, that day, this was no longer just a job. And I saw that this had to happen. And we did, I went to do, not too long after, we had done an oral history for Monsieur Charret, who was a shoe worker. And he knew a lot about shoes, so, but he wasn't feeling good. So we did it for about 45 minutes, and then I saw he was tired, so we said, well, we'll come back. And well, I got 2 weeks later, I got a phone call at 10 o'clock at night, and his wife said, Rachel, can you come and see my husband? He'd like to finish his oral history. And so I says, okay, you know, you're at home? She says, no, at St. Mary's Hospital. So I went to the hospital and with our archivist, and when I saw him, I said, well, that's okay, you know, that we don't need to finish it now. And he says, no. He says, my wife understands. So she left, and we took a half hour, and we finished interviewing doing his oral history. And so then gave him a hug and says, see you, we'll talk to you later. And the next morning when I came in, his sister wrote to me to say he passed away an hour after he finished his oral history. So, you know, those are the types of things that, to me, there must be something in each one of us that needs to be remembered. And that's what this museum is all about, is remembering and reminding people that, you know, we were a great community, we're amazing people, and not just were, we still are, you know, so we kind of forget it sometimes. Well, it was a simple way of living when we grew up. Now it's gotten, you know, with the technology and everything. I believe in technology, don't get me wrong, but I think we're losing with technology, we're losing a little bit of the personal and the communication, the true communications. There's something about face-to-face talking, and not always just, when I see people across the table from each other and, you know, texting to each other instead of talking, I go, geez, you know, we've come a long ways. But you know, the community's been through some traumatic things, and probably about 4 years ago, that really was bugging me, and because of all the oral histories I've done and listening to the stories, one of the things that bothered me was, why in the world did Lustenabend get so depressed and so down during, you know, after the mills and all that? And it dawned on me one night, I woke up and I went, that's it. You know, to me, when I was talking and showing the mill workers and the shoe workers around, they all talked about the work they did. The work, I was a doffer, I was a weaver, you know, I was a room girl. So what they were was who they were. So in history speak, I guess, the mills and the shoe shops went away overnight. It's like it happened so quick. And so all of a sudden, all these workers were out of work, and they didn't know who they were anymore, because they had not learned to internalize that they're still the person that they were. And then if you look at the community, that's what happened too, because the community, these were the economic engines of our communities, the big mills and the big shoe shops and whatnot. That went out overnight, and all of a sudden there was nothing. There was no industry hardly, you know, and there was no place for people to work and so forth. So the community also didn't know who it was. And it took a long, long time for it to start kind of healing and getting over that. And I think that's why we we took longer to get out of the hump because we were a major hub of manufacturing. But now, all of a sudden, I think with some of the younger people coming in, we're seeing a revival. We're seeing small businesses are coming in, young people. The newspaper called me once and said they were doing an article on some of the new young leaders coming into the community. And I said, they asked me how I felt about it. And I says, well, what do you mean how I feel about it? And they said, well, you know, we consider you a leader of the community, and so how do you feel about these young people coming in and taking over? And I says, they said, aren't you upset about it? And I says, why should I be upset? Are you kidding me? I said, I can't wait, because, you know, if they don't come, if we don't have them to come and take our place, I can't move on. You know, I'd like to retire someday, you know. And so if there's nobody behind you, what are you going to do, you know? And no, bring them on. I hope we get tons more to come in, and you're seeing more and more young people coming in, and so you're seeing the growth, you know, and the new ideas, and the new immigrants are coming in. Although that's why we did the immigration exhibit, because we wanted to kind of try to heal some of that, to show people, you know, that even though we're different, it's okay, because when we first came in, the Irish, and remember, to me, history repeats itself. When the French Canadians came in, they were not liked at all by the Irish. I mean, there was a big war on the Main Street Bridge, and the French and the Irish threw each other off the bridge, you know, into the river, and they had big rumbles going up on Ash Street, you know, where when they saw the Irish coming in with their batons, their sticks and whatnot, oh, there's got to be a big rumble, you know, between the French and the Irish, and it was bloody, you know. So, so that was, today what was going on was mild compared to, but we kind of forgot, you know, we get complacent with each other, and we forget that we have a history in our immigration story too, so.